America is facing mounting crises from all directions, deliberately manufactured by our enemies, both within and without, to destroy America once and for all. Few could have imagined 10 years ago where we'd be in America today. We're confronted on all sides by interminable crises that threaten the very fabric of our nation, from a border flooded with millions of migrants from all over the world to a fentanyl crisis killing more American Jews every year than the past 3 wars combined. Radical transgender activism and other cultural insanity has pushed more youths to commit suicide than at any other time in history. It seems as though the world is rapidly coming unglued, but it is actually a diabolical plan that has been operating for over 100 years and is now showing its face. Such is the book cover note written by James Simpson, economist, businessman, investigative journalist, and best-selling author. He was a former candidate for the U.S. Congress in 2020. In his earlier career, he worked as an economist and budget analyst for the White House Office of Management and Budget. James Simpson is our guest today in the Economic War Room. Welcome, Jim.
Hey, Kevin, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you back. You were here in episode 158 about 3 years ago. I remember it was in the midst of COVID, and we met without masks in our studio. And you've got a scary new book out. It's called The Manufactured Crisis, The War to End America. James, who is behind this manufactured crisis?
Well, the easy answer is the radical left, which today owns completely the Democratic Party. They are a wholly owned subsidiary of the international communist left.
And wow, commies.
Yes, we have to say the C word, because we've been afraid of that word, using that word, since the 1950s, when Joseph McCarthy was so heavily vilified for correctly identifying that there were communists operating in the federal government, and specifically in the military bureaucracy. And so he was heavily vilified. And that was because, even then in the 50s, the communists were very much involved in censorship and censoring people and destroying people, essentially, that got too close to the truth.
Well, I read a book, The Naked Communist. My father gave it to me, and I actually hung around with the author, W. Cleon Skousen, and he wrote about the 45 goals of the Communist Party USA, and we're seeing them implemented one after another. But it's not under the face of, we thought we beat communism, the Cold War is over. But in reality, it continues to operate rather from Red China or through what's left in Russia or other places. Describe that global communist cartel that's attacking Americans.
Yeah, well, people talk about the globalists, which closely identify with the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. And then they talk about the communists, which now today we closely identify with Red China. But none of the other communist countries ever went away. And then there are more and more every year. So what happened in 1991 when the Soviet Union supposedly fell and communism became a discredited thing of the past? Well, it was actually an active measure. It was not a real fall. People don't like to hear that, but we did not defeat communism. What they did was they changed the nameplates on their door. And so in Russia, there's no longer communism. There's just a bunch of corrupt oligarchs. But the fact of the matter is, there were always corrupt oligarchs in all of these countries. And because, after all, as you and I know, that is the goal. That book that you wrote in 2022, According to Plan, tells the story exactly. And I bring it up in my book in the chapter on political ponerology, that is the study of evil, in which a Polish psychiatrist and a couple of his colleagues secretly studied the communist leaders in Poland. And they came to the conclusion that communist leaders are basically psychopaths, but they are greedy, selfish psychopaths with an absolute lust for absolute power and the wealth that goes with it. And you talk about that in that book very beautifully. I've talked about it in the Karl Marx book. I talk about it in this book. But back to the original thing, the Soviet Union created the Communist International a few years after they took over Russia in 1917. And that was specifically to put all the communist parties of the world under Soviet rule. So the Soviets guided the Communist International, which held within it the communist parties of the world, most importantly, the Communist Party USA. And the Communist Party USA has existed since 1919, and it became a formal place where all the radicals that already existed in the United States could, better organize. But they were led and paid for by the Soviet Union, as were all the communist parties of the world.
And last time you were here, James, you shared with us about how they also reached out through the green, the red-green axis, and the Islamic movement.
Yep. And the Islamic movement really, a lot of the Islamists think that they're fighting for a global caliphate, but actually the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the main radical Muslim organization, it founded the Al-Qaeda, founded Hamas, and many of the other radical Muslim organizations, but they've been controlled by the Soviet Union since World War II. They were funded, they were organized, they were trained, and they were directed by the Soviet Union. And the same thing is true of Iran. The Iranian mullahs all went to Moscow University. These people are all just greedy, power-hungry people that want to take everything the world has to offer, and the rest of us can go to hell for all they care.
Well, what you just described is a global rebranding of evil. We thought the wall fell and we'd beaten communism. They just rebranded and came back at us. You've got in your book incredible thoughts on how we've developed where we are, but also solutions. We're going to have to take a break. When we come back, let's talk about the 4 stages of crisis. In uncertain times, finding stability in the economy can feel challenging. But what if you could navigate economic volatility while honoring your biblical values? At Timothy Plan, they believe this balance is possible. Timothy Plan filters its volatility-weighted ETFs and family of mutual funds through a biblical pro-life and pro-family lens, so you can see competitive returns and moral responsibility, helping you to weather the economic storms. With Timothy Plan, align your investments with your values while adapting to our ever-changing culture. Since 1994, Timothy Plan has been recognized leader in biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, your bridge between faith, finances, and the future. Visit timothyplan.com or call 1-800-TIM-PLAN or 1-800-846-7526. Investing includes risk, including possible loss of principal. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com.
Washington said paper money opens the door to every species of fraud and injustice. Jefferson said paper is poverty. Hamilton said to emit an unfunded paper as the sign of value ought not to continue a formal part of the Constitution. The founders hated paper money, so they put a pirate money clause in the Constitution for our state to use. Learn more at transactionalgold.com.
We're talking with James Simpson, the author of Manufactured Crises, The War to End America. And in this book, he's got an incredible understanding of an interview that took place. It's Yuri Bezmenov. He was interviewed by G. Edward Griffin from this program. We've had him on the show. He wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island. But that incredible interview, which I guess was like from the 50s or the 60s, maybe the 70s, I don't know. It's a long time ago, but it describes 4 stages to destroy the West. And you quote from Mike Waller, our mutual friend, and these stages are demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. And then you walk through the societal changes that are being forced through this orchestrated crisis.
Yeah.
James, describe those 4 just briefly, and then I want to hear about the Cloward Piven strategy, an idea that you took to Glenn Beck that he's made popular.
Right. Well, thank you. It's a good way to describe what they've been doing. Although, in my view, they've all been, those stages have been all been following along, growing simultaneously rather than one after the other, like it's some, plan. Well, we do this first, and then we do that first, then we do that. No, they've been doing all of these things together at the same time, and but slowly and gradually, so we don't notice. Like, putting the frog in cold water and turning up the heat so it gradually gets used to it until it's boiling and it doesn't even know it. But so, for example, demoralization. We have been under attack culturally since the 1930s, when the Frankfurt School, which was a school founded in Frankfurt, Germany, communist school, founded by, under the direct guidance and authorization of Vladimir Lenin of the Soviet Union. And the people who founded that school were either members of the Communist International or they were fellow travelers. All of them were communists. Many of them were Jewish. So when Hitler came to power in 1933, they had to get out of there, and they were resettled at Columbia University Teachers College in New York City by none other than Edward R. Murrow, who later became world famous CBS news anchor. But they created in that school, the Frankfurt School, these communist professors created something called critical theory. And their goal was to criticize every aspect of Western society. And of course, you've heard of critical race theory. Well, there's critical legal theory. There are literally dozens of critical theories today that have increasingly broken down our society into smaller segments and criticized those to the point where you just can't be an American and be proud. You have to be ashamed because they have taken it apart and found something wrong with everything we've ever done. Critical race theory is probably the most prominent today and gets the most objection from both blacks and whites. But it's all designed to corrupt our culture and demoralize our culture. When Willy Munzenberg, one of the communists, the German communist under Lenin's guidance, started this, he said, we have to organize the intellectuals and use them to make Western civilization stink, because only then, when we have corrupted all its values and made life impossible, can we impose communism. So
just thinking about that just for a second, I picture taking back, 50 years ago, a video of a male boxer beating up a female in the boxing ring, but the male pretending to be a woman and taking that back, they would find everything wrong with that. Now we're so demoralized that if we see that and we say, no, that's not right, we're called homophobic or racist or whatever else, and we're being criticized. The only thing that we're allowed to be proud of is sin. The whole notion of the Pride Month, what are you prideful about?
Yeah, right, exactly. What do you have to be proud about? Your preferred method of sexual activity. Well, why is that something? I mean, no, that it's necessarily anything to be ashamed of, but why is it something to be proud of? You know,
and make every corporation in America bow. Every corporation has to put a flag. Every government has to put up a flag, and we're proud of it. Look, keep it in the bedroom, people. This is not something, the people of the 1950s would be horrified. Exactly. All right, so talk about quickly, we've got a couple of minutes before the break. Sure. One of the things that's demoralized us is the open border. And the fact that we'll see that the people who suffer under the hurricane don't have the relief that they need, and yet if you're resettled here illegally, you're given these big debit cards with thousands and thousands of dollars on it. But you people who are suffering, that are Americans, you get your $750, and you better say you're thankful. How is this a part? How does that tie into the Cloward-Piven strategy that you uncovered and exposed through Glenn Beck?
Well, it's really as part of the demoralization process, just as the Palestine, Ohio situation was. They didn't. The Biden administration did nothing to help those people, just like FEMA has done next to nothing to help the people in North Carolina. It's all been a private effort to, save those people. And this is what I mean by these. Stages are all commingled. They all are happening at the same time. So the crisis strategy, create a crisis in which you can then present a solution. The crisis strategy was outlined, even though it wasn't necessarily a new idea, but it was given force when Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven, two Columbia University, again, sociology professors and radical socialists themselves, created something that became known as the Cloward-Piven strategy.
All right, we're going to have to take a break. When we come back, we'll explain that in detail.
Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government, and freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It has to be fought for and defended by each generation.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
In this most critical time in our nation's history, now more than ever, Americans need to align with companies that support our constitutional rights and God-given freedoms. Patriot Mobile supports your values and provides exceptional 100% U.S.-based customer service. Join the movement today. Go to patriotmobile.com or call 972-PATRIOT.
We're talking with James Simpson, the author of Manufacturer's Crisis. He is also the man who first explained the Cloward-Piven strategy to Glenn Beck, that Glenn then took, and now people understand there's a real strategy, and we were just describing it. Can you get into some of the details? How does it operate?
The idea is, and like I say, this idea is not new. Lenin outlined it back in the 1920s. But the idea is to create crisis after crisis that overwhelms the society with problems, especially overwhelming the government with problems that the government can't solve, doesn't have the money to solve, and ultimately collapses. And in the ashes, they hope to impose communism. And so what they started with was the welfare system. Johnson had just passed legislation for the Great Society, radically expanding welfare. And Cloward and Piven thought, well, if we can get every single person onto welfare, getting every single benefit to which they are entitled, the government can't afford it, and the government will collapse. And when it does, we will suggest a solution, and their solution was a guaranteed annual income for all Americans, which in today's dollars would have translated to be equal to between $40,000 and $80,000 per year for a family of four. Now think about that, giving every family of four, whether they work or not, basically median income. Who would work?
Yeah.
Who would work? And they also said this would be a replacement because obviously the Great Society had overwhelmed the government, but they're not going to discontinue those other programs. So the whole idea of a guaranteed annual income was to put further burdens on the government because obviously that was going to be more expensive than all the welfare programs combined.
Now, when you add to that, you add the whole notion of open border. I mean, Milton Friedman said it well. He said you can have a welfare state or you can have open borders. You can't have both without going bankrupt. That just accelerates the whole bankruptcy notion.
Yeah, well, that was, that's another part of the Cloward-Piven strategy. They also attacked voting. They also attacked our financial system. The subprime mortgage crisis was a deliberately created crisis strategy. And ACORN, the Association for Community Organizations of Reform Now, was founded by Cloward and Piven in the 1970s. And they carried on the Cloward-Piven strategy, ever since.
Are we seeing that right now? We have this whole promises by Democrat politicians, for example. Harris has said, you'll get $50,000 or $25,000 for first-time home buyers. We'll give black men forgivable loans so they can start pot shops and things like that. This is all Cloward-Piven, isn't it?
Wash, rinse, repeat. Wash, rinse, repeat. Yes, it's the same thing over and over again. And, part of it, the Green New Deal or the Green Job or the Green Program that Obama started with $80 billion.
I hear the sirens going off. This is the problem we're facing.
They're coming after me. He created an $80 billion green energy program, which was an absolute failure. So what did the Biden administration do? They put in their laughably called Inflation Reduction Act, a green program with $230 billion.
It's hitting every aspect of society, the investment world with stakeholder capitalism, weaponizing the poor through Black Lives Matter, making taxpayers a minority, DEI, the Great Reset. All these are in your terrific book. All right, we have just a couple of minutes left. What do we do? I like the book, not because it lists out the problems, which it does, and it does in a really intelligent fashion with the facts. I mean, you see so many footnotes, but it also brings solutions. Tell us the answers. What do we do about this?
There's no magic pill. This is going to be an effort to recapture our culture, but it has to start at the top, because if we don't have people in power who will push those policies, we're lost. So this November 5th, we have to vote for Donald J. Trump as president. We absolutely have to. And we need to downstream at the federal, state, and local level elect Republicans, and preferably, of course, good, conservative, solid, brave Republicans. But like everything else, you get the good, you get the okay, and then you get the not so good. But we absolutely, if we are going to retake the levers of power to initiate positive change, we absolutely have to have good leadership at the top, and that would be our only choice is Donald Trump. So we have to do that.
We have
And
to
then,
vote. You mentioned that, but we also
Yeah.
have to do beyond our own vote, encourage others to vote. And then you mentioned get to work and voter rolls, make sure we have clean elections, do education, promote free speech, those sorts of things as well.
Absolutely. No. And, I like the way it's all sort of come together. I mean, Elon Musk and RFK joining the Trump campaign, those were real signs that the worm is turning. These are people who could easily stay on the sidelines and not risk all the vilification they're now getting and the attacks they're now getting by siding with President Trump. But the whole idea, they recognize that we are at a critical juncture in our society. If we do not elect Donald Trump, if we elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, two of the most radical people ever to walk on the political stage in the United States.
One raised by a Marxist and one sold out to the Chinese Communist Party. No question.
Absolutely.
All right,
No.
we're going to have to wrap up, but you've got some beautiful things in this amazing book called The Manufactured Crisis. You talk about how we restore the foundations, what we do on immigration, how we restore the culture, language, lawfare, media, Islam, how we deal with that, the goals and tactics we should be using. And you have a key one. You said we should pray, call out, cry out to God. What gives you hope? We've got 15 seconds.
Absolutely. My hope rests in my God, who I call Jesus Christ. My hope rests there. We need supernatural assistance in this fight. And if we ask for it and we mean it, we'll get it.
All right. We'll summarize all this in our free economic battle plan. You can get it at economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.